Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are going to finish off our piece we were reading in a testament of hope. Anyway, part three of this piece that I've been reading since I haven't got to finish it yet. I don't think there is a single major insurance company that hires Negro lawyers. Even within the agencies of the federal government, most Negro employees are in the lower echelons. Only a handful of Negroes in federal employment are in the upper income brackets. This is a situation in federal employment. This is a situation that cuts across this country's economic spectrum. The Chicago Urban League recently conducted a research project in the Kenwood communities on the South Side. They discovered that the average educational grade level of Negroes in that community was 10.6 years, and the median income was about $4,200 a year. In nearby Gage Park, the medial educational grade level of the whites was 8.6 years, but the median income was 96,000 or $9,600 per year. In fact, the average white high school dropout makes as much as, if not more, than the average Negro college graduate. Solutions for these problems, urgent as they are, must be constructive and rational. Rioting and violence provide no solutions for economic problems. Much of the justification for rioting uh, has come from the thesis originally set forth by Franz Fanon that violence has a certain cleansing effect. Perhaps in a special psychological sense, he may be he may have had a point, but we have seen a better and more constructive cleansing process in our nonviolent demonstrations. Another theory to justify a violent revolution is that rioting enables Negroes to overcome their fear of the white man, but they are just as afraid of the power structure after a riot as before. I remember that was true when our staff went into Rochester, New York after the riot of 1964, when we discussed the possibility of going down to talk with the police. The people who had been most aggressive in the violence were afraid to talk. They still had a sense of inferiority, and not until they were bolstered by the presence of our staff and given reassurance of their political power and their rightness of the cause and the justness of their grievances were they able to and willing to sit down and talk to the police chief and the city manager about the conditions that had produced the riot. As a matter of fact, I think the aura of paramilitarism among the black militant groups speaks much more of fear than it does of confidence. I know in my own experience that I was much more afraid in Montgomery when I had no gun, when I had a gun in my house. When I decided that as a teacher of the philosophy of nonviolence, I couldn't keep a gun, I came face to face with the question of death and I dealt with it. And from that point on, I no longer needed a gun, nor have I been afraid. Ultimately, one's sense of manhood must come from within him. The riots of Negro ghettos have been, in one sense, merely another expression of the growing climate of violence in America. When a culture begins to feel threatened by its own inadequacies, the majority of men tend to prop themselves up by artificial means rather than dig down deep into their spiritual and cultural well springs. America seems to have reached this point. Americans as a whole feel threatened by communism on one hand, and on the other by the rising tide of aspirations among the undeveloped nations. I think most Americans know in their hearts that their country has been terribly wrong in its dealings with other peoples around the world. When Rome began to disintegrate from within, it turned to a strengthening of the military establishment rather than to a correction of the corruption within the society. We are doing the same thing in this country, and the result will probably be the same. Unless, and here I admit to a bit of chauvinism, the black man in America can provide a new soul force for all Americans, a new expression of the American dream that need not be realized at the expense of other men around the world, but a dream of opportunity in life that can be shared with the rest of the world. It seems glaringly obvious to me that the development of a humanitarian means of dealing with some of the social problems of the world and the correlative revolution in American values that this will entail is a much better way of protecting ourselves against the threat of violence than the military means we have chosen. On these grounds, I must indict the Johnson administration. It has seemed amazingly devoid of statesmanship. And when creative statesmanship wanes, irrational militarism increases. In this sense, President Kennedy was far more of a statesman than President Johnson. He was a man who was big enough to admit when he was wrong, as he did after the Bay of Pigs incident. But Lyndon Johnson seems to be unable to make this kind of statesmanlike gesture in connection with Vietnam. And I think that this has led, as Senator Fulbright has said, um, to such a strengthening of the military industrial complex of this country that the president now finds himself almost totally trapped by it. Even at this point, readily, when the readily, when he can readily summon popular support to end the bombing in Vietnam, he resists. Yet bombs in Vietnam also explode at home. They destroy the hopes and possibilities for a decent America. In our efforts to dispel this atmosphere of violence in this country, we cannot afford to overlook the root cause of the riots. The President's Riot Commission concluded that most violence prone Negroes are teenagers or young adults who almost inevitably are underemployed, un, underemployed means working every day but earning an income below the poverty level, or who are employed in menial jobs. And according to a recent Department of Labor statistical report, a 24.8% of Negro youth are currently unemployed, a statistic that does not include the drifters from who avoid the census takers. Actually, it is my guess that the statistics are very, very conservative in this area. The Bureau of the Census has omitted a 10% error in this age group, and the unemployment statistics are based on those who are actually applying for jobs. But it isn't just a lack of work, that's a lack of meaningful work. In Cleveland, a 58% of the young men between the ages of 16 and 25 were estimated to be either unemployed or underemployed. This appalling situation is probably 90% of the root cause of the Negro riots. A Negro who has finished high school often watches the white classmates go out into the job market and earn $100 a week, while he, because he is black, is expected to work for $40 a week. Hence, there is a tremendous hostility and resentment that only a difference in race keeps him out of an adequate job. This situation is social dynamite. When you add the lack of recreational facilities and adequate job counseling, and the continuation of an aggressively hostile police environment, you have a truly explosive situation. Any night on any street corner in any Negro ghetto of the country, a nervous policeman can start a riot simply by being impolite or by expressing racial prejudice. And white people are sadly unaware how routinely and frequently this occurs. It hardly needs to be said that solutions to these critical problems are overwhelmingly urgent. The President's Riot Commission recommended that funds for summer programs aimed at young Negroes should be increased. New York is already spending more on its social summer programs than on its year round poverty efforts, but these are only tentative and emergency steps toward a truly meaningful and permanent solution. And the negative thinking in this area, voiced by many whites, does not help the situation. Unfortunately, many white people think that we merely reward a rioter by making positive action to better his situation. What these white people do not realize is that Negroes who riot have given up on America. When nothing is done to alleviate their plight, This merely confirms the Negro's conviction that America is a hopelessly decadent society. When something positive is done, however, when constructive action follows a rioter's despair is allayed and he is forced to reevaluate America and to consider whether some good might actually come from our society after all. But I repeat, the recent curative steps that have been taken are, at best, inadequate. The summer poverty programs, like most other government projects, function well in some places and are totally ineffective in others. The difference, in large measure, is one of citizen participation. That is the key to success or failure. In cases such as the Farmers Marketing Cooperative Association in the Black Belt of Alabama and the Child Development Group in Mississippi, where the people are really involved in the planning and action of the program, it is one of the best experiences to self help and grassroots initiative. But in places like Chicago, where poverty programs are used strictly as a tool of the political machinery and for dispensing party patronage, the very concept of helping the poor is defiled, and the poverty program becomes just another form of enslavement. I still wouldn't want to do away with it, though, even in Chicago. We must simply fight at both the local and the national levels to gain as much community control as possible over the poverty program. But there is no single answer to the plight of the American Negro. Conditions and needs vary greatly in different sections of the country. I think that the place to start, however, is in the area of human relations, and especially in the area of community police relations. This is a sensitive and touchy problem that has rarely been adequately emphasized. Virtually every riot has begun from some police action. If you try to tell the people in most Negro communities that the police are their friends, they just laugh at you. Obviously, something desperately needs to be done to correct this. I have been particularly impressed by the fact that even in the state of Mississippi, there the FBI did a significant training with the Mississippi police. The police are much more courteous to Negroes than they are in Chicago or New York. Our police forces simply must develop an attitude of courtesy and respect for the ordinary citizen. If we can just stop policemen from using profanity in their encounters with black people, we will have accomplished a lot. In the larger sense, police must cease being occupation troops in the ghetto and start protecting its residents. Yet, very few cities have really faced up to this problem and tried to do something about it. It is the most abrasive element of the Negro white relations, but it is the last to be scientifically and objectively appraised. When you go beyond a relatively simple, though serious problem, such as police racism, however, you begin to get into all the complexities of the modern American economy. Urban transit systems in most American cities, for example, have become a genuine civil rights issue. And a valid one because of the layout of the rapid transit systems determines the accessibility of jobs to the black community. If transportation systems in American cities could be laid out so as to provide an opportunity for poor people to get meaningful employment, then they could begin to move into the mainstream of American life. A good example of this problem is any home city of Atlanta, where the rapid transit system has been laid out for the convenience of the white upper middle class suburbanites who commute to their jobs downtown. The system has virtually no consideration for connecting the poor people with their jobs. There is only one possible explanation for this situation, and that is the racist blindness of the city planners. The same problems are to be found in the areas of rent supplement and low income housing. The relevance of these issues to human relations and human rights cannot be overemphasized. The kind of house a man lives in, along with the quality of his employment, determines to a large degree the quality of his family life. I have known too many people in my own parish in Atlanta who, because they were living in overcrowded apartments, were constantly bickering with other members of their families. A situation that produced many kinds of severe dysfunctions in family relations. And yet, I have seen these same families achieve harmony when they were able to afford a house, allowing for a little personal privacy and freedom of movement. All these human relation problems are complex and related, and it's very difficult to assign priorities, especially as long as the Vietnam War continues. The Great Society has become a victim of the war. I think there was a sincere desire in this country 4 or 5 years ago to move toward a genuinely great society. And I have little doubt that there would be have been a gradual increase in federal expenditures in this direction rather than the gradual decline that has occurred if the war in Vietnam had been avoided. One of the incongruities of this situation is the fact that such a large number of the soldiers in the armed forces in Vietnam, especially the Negroes, or sorry, especially the frontline soldiers who are actually doing the fighting, are Negroes. Negroes have always held the hope that if they really demonstrate that they are great soldiers and they really fight for America and help save American democracy, then when they come back home, America will treat them better. This is this has not been the case. Negro soldiers returning from World War I were met with race riots, job discrimination, and continuation of the bigotry that they had experienced before. After World War II, the GI Bill did offer some hope for a better life to those who had the educational background to take advantage of it. And there was proportionally less turmoil. But for the Negro GI, military service still represents a means of escape from the oppressive ghettos of the rural South and the urban North. He often sees the Army as an avenue of educational opportunities and job training. He sees the military uniform a symbol of dignity that has long been denied him by society. The tragedy in this is that military service is probably the only possible escape for most young Negro men. Many of them go into the army risking death in order that they might have a few of the human possibilities of life. They know that life in the city ghetto of life in the rural South almost certainly means jail or death or humiliation. And so, by comparison, military service is really the lesser risk. One young man on our staff, Hosea Williams, returned from the foxholes of Germany, a 60% disabled veteran. After 13 months of in the Veterans Hospital, he went back to his hometown of Attapulgis, Georgia. On his way home, he went into the bus station America at Americus, Georgia, to get a drink of water while waiting for his next bus. And while he stood there on his crutches, drinking from the fountain, he was beaten savagely by white hoodlums. This pathetic incident is all too typical of the treatment received by Negroes in this country. Not only physical brutality, but brutal discrimination when a Negro tries to buy a house, and brutal violence against the Negro's soul when he finds himself denied a job that he knows he is qualified for. There is also the violence of having to live in a community and pay higher consumer prices for goods or higher rent for equivalent housing than are charged to the white areas of the city. Do you think that a can of beans almost always costs a few cents more in grocery? Do you know that a can of beans almost always costs a few cents more in grocery chain stores located in Negro ghetto than in a store of that same chain located in the upper middle class suburbs where the median income is 5 times as high? The Negro knows it because he works in a white man's house as a cook or a gardener. And that and what do you know and what do you think this knowledge does to his soul? How do you think it affects his view of society he lives in? How can you expect anything but disillusionment and bitterness? This question that now faces us is whether we can turn the Negro's disillusionment and bitterness into hope and faith in the essential goodness of the American system. If we don't, our society will crumble. It is a paradox for those Negroes who have given up on America, are doing more to improve it than are the profession that are. It is a paradox that those Negroes who have given up on America are doing more to improve it than are its professional patriots. They are stirring the mass of smug, somnolent citizens who are neither evil nor good, to an awareness of crisis. The confrontation involves not only good, to an awareness of not only good. The confrontation involves not only their mortality, but their self interest, and that confrontation promises to evoke positive action. This is not a nation of venal people. It is a land of individuals who, in the majority, have not cared, who have been heartless about their black neighbors because their ears are blocked and their eyes blinded by the tragic myth that Negroes endure abuse without pain or complaint. Even when protest flared and denied the myth, they were fed new doctrines of inhumanity that argued that Negroes were arrogant, lawless, and ungrateful. Habitual white discrimination was transformed into white backlash. But for some, the lies had lost their grip and an internal disquiet grew. Poverty and discrimination were undeniably real. They scarred the nation. They dirtied our honor and diminished our pride. An insistent question defied evasion. Was security for some being purchased at the price of degradation for others? Everything in our traditions said this kind of injustice was the system of the past and or of other nations. And yet there it was, abroad in our own land. Thus was born, particularly in the young generation, a spirit of dissent that ranged from superficial disavowal to the old values the old values to total commitment to wholesale, drastic, and immediate social reform. Yet all of it was dissent. Their voice is still a minority, but united with millions of black protesting voices, it has become a sound of distant thunder, increasing in volume with the gathering of storm clouds. This dissent is America's hope. It shines in the long tradition of American ideas that began with courageous Minutemen in New England that continued the abolitionist movement, that reemerged in the populist revolts, and decades later that burst forth to elect Franklin Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy. Today's dissenters tell the complacent majority that the time has come when further evasion of social responsibility in a turbulent world will court disaster and death. America has not yet changed because so many think it need not change, but this is the illusion of the damned. America must change because 23 million black citizens will no longer live supinely in a wretched past. They have left the valley of despair and they have found strength in struggle, and whether they live or die, they shall never crawl nor retreat again. Joined by white allies, they will shake the prison walls until they fall. America must change. A voice out of Bethlehem 2,000 years ago said that all men are equal. It said right would triumph Jews of Nazareth wrote no books. He owned no property. Jesus of Nazareth wrote no books. He owned no property to endow him with influence. He had no friends in the courts of the powerful, but he changed the course of mankind with only the poor and the despised. Naive and unsophisticated though we may be, the poor and despised of the 20th century will revolutionize this era. In our arrogance, lawlessness, and ingratitude, we will fight for human justice, brotherhood, secure peace, and abundance for all. Whether we have won these in a spirit of unshakable violence, then in luminous splendor the Christian era will truly begin. And that was printed in Playboy, his last um, essay. So, yeah, Dr. King, even up to his last, had hope for a better future. He said, even though things are still bleak, we can fight for the equality, the rights that are deserved for all. He don't agree with writing, but he understands why some people do it. Because many feel they've been left no choice. And society don't seem to really care. But he still had hope that everything would turn out better. But that'll end all the essays, and the next one I read will start us in interviews of Dr. King. So, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.